Hey guys, Brian here, Starlite Pulp. Hope everybody's well out there. Thanks for checking in. Tonight we've got Mr. Tod Goldberg with us, and his most recent book is Gangsters Don't Die. It's part of the Gangsterland trilogy. It's actually the finishing book in the Gangsterland trilogy. And so, Todd, how you doing tonight, man?
I am great. I just got vaxxed at my local CVS. So if at any point during this interview, listeners, if I begin to speak babble, that's the computerized RNA getting to me.
That's right. Well, and if I'm not mistaken, you got vaxxed at the pretty shady CVS there on Dade Palm. So
Yeah. So I mean, this is it. I might start voting Republican at the end of this conversation.
right. Okay, so obviously, so first, just as a kind of a brief overview, right? With the Gangsterland trilogy, we've got Sal Cupertine, who, and I'm not ruining anything here for anybody that hasn't read it, kind of reappears. He's a Chicago button man, kind of reappears as Rabbi David Cohen in a suburb of Vegas, right?
Correct.
And all three books kind of deal with the present of him being near Vegas, but more the aftermath of the things that are chasing him from his past life.
Right, exactly. And the sort of the problem that he finds of pretending to be a rabbi for so long that he becomes a rabbi.
Yeah, absolutely. He gets good at it, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you fake it for so long and you're successful at it, I mean, that just becomes who you are. I mean, and it turns out that being a rabbi and being a hitman are not so different when you get right down to it. It's just about being an effective communicator of consequence.
There you go. I'm down with that. I like that. Okay. So first off, you it takes place in Summerlin, right?
Right.
Which and if I'm not mistaken, you lived there.
Yeah, I lived in Summerlin from 1998 to 2000. If you're not familiar with it, Summerlin is a master plan community in Las Vegas that was developed by the Howard Hughes Corporation in the early 1990s. And it's this sort of bucolic part of Las Vegas that essentially just looks like Irvine. They designed it to look like Irvine, but there's also traffic circles everywhere and leafy places, and many of the streets are named for Indian tribes. So there's like Hualapai and Cheyenne and things like that. And it's a very nice part of Las Vegas. You could live there and never ever go to the Strip if you didn't want to.
Very cool. All right. And so so you started the research, correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but you started the research, I think, in about 08 for
correct. Yeah. So I wrote a short story for Las Vegas Noir, which is one of those Akashic anthologies.
Right.
And they had asked me to write about Summerlin because I had lived there, because of course I'd lived there. I've been a middle-aged Jew since the day I was born. And so I wrote a short story called Mitzvah that took place there.
Right.
And it was about Sal Cupertine's last day on the job as the Rabbi David Cohen. And that got published in 2008.
Right. So 08, and here we are, 2023. So yeah. 15 years of your life, right? 15 years of your life. So as you look back and you reflect kind of on that whole time period, what are some of the things that are kind of like the comeback moments for you? Like, the things that you look back, and it might be with the Rabbi, it might be your research, it might be the book tours, whatever it might be. But 3 books, 1 story, 15 years. How do you kind of reconcile that and tie it all together?
Well, it's actually 3 books and a short story collection also.
Oh, right.
So
yeah.
The Low Desert. So I've actually written a quartet. Wait a minute. I gotta start telling people this. I wrote a quartet.
You wrote a quartet.
I'm like Lawrence Durrell, and I didn't even know it. So I wrote a quartet. Shit. We gotta change all the marketing.
You did.
So it's been a fascinating journey for me, because when I wrote Mitzvah in 2008,
right.
I didn't know anything. I didn't know a goddamn thing about being a rabbi, because right. I'm not a great, well, I'm a better Jew now, but I wasn't a great Jew then.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you actually named Sal Cupertine after, I mean, you didn't know it at the time, but you named him after the rabbi there in Summerlin.
Yeah, so I named him Rabbi David Cohen. Right. And it wasn't until Gangsterland came out that I found out that this. So I based the synagogue on a synagogue in Summerlin that I would drive by all the time on my way to Baja Fresh, essentially.
Right.
And it's on a street, Hill Point in Summerlin. It's actually filled with some churches and synagogues. And then Sheldon Adelson, who's dead, thankfully, he had his giant campus out there too, surrounded by a perimeter of armed guards.
I bet.
So it's this very strange street filled with churches and synagogues, and all synagogues are guarded essentially. And I didn't ever bother to see what the rabbi's name was at this synagogue that I was pretending to write about. But a rabbi named Cohen is that Cohen means rabbi. So it's not surprising that this guy's name was Rabbi Cohen, although it was to me when he went online and said, "Have you guys heard about this book, Gangsterland? This guy's stealing my life." He was a wonderful guy. But anyway, to go back to the research thing, I didn't know I didn't know anything about being Jewish, really. I'm a Neil Diamond Beastie Boys Jew. I'm a corned beef and mayonnaise and a pork chop Jew. And so when I finished that short story and I realized that there was something more to it, I recognized that I had to go back and read. And so between 2009, essentially, and 2011 or 10, somewhere in there, I read the Talmud and the Torah. I read the large swatches of the Mishnah. I read a ton of Jewish eschatology, all kinds of stuff, so that I would know what this guy was going to know when he began to learn it.
Sure.
And that was a really eye-opening experience. I'll tell you, here's the one thing, Brian, that was really a surprise. I've got these books, they're over here on my shelf, that had belonged to my mom, and she had passed away in 2010, and I inherited them from her. But she had inherited them from her parents.
Sure.
And there are these books on Jewish thought and philosophy and stuff. And one of the books still has my grandfather's handwriting in it, him putting stars next to stuff and underlining things. And so reading these books and seeing the things that he was pondering and thinking about in the 1940s and 1950s, these are old ass books. These are from the 20s.
Right.
And the things that he was underlining are the things that I would underline. The things that were interesting to him are the things that are interesting to me. The most interesting one that I found during the reading, and this was the point at which the process of writing the book really came clear to me, was that there's a line in the Talmud that says, "If a man comes to kill you, wake up early and kill him first." And my grandfather had underlined that.
Yeah.
I was like, the fuck was Papa Dave into?
Right.
What was going on in Walla Walla, Washington? The Papa Dave was like, yeah, I got to kill a guy.
Right.
I need to take a dude out in Milton Freewater in the morning. So that was really the thing, to read what my grandfather had read and what my mom had read, and to be moved or interested in the same things. That ends up being sort of a thread that runs through these books about, sort of what it means to be an observer of history, to be the witness to tragedy over a culture, a culture's life, which is what happens in the Jewish faith. Right.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. I love that. So one of the things that I read over and over again that I thought was really, I don't know. I thought it was kind of off base and a little funny. But when I was reading reviews and interviews and things like that with regards to the kind of Gangsterland trilogy, is this whole concept that somehow Rabbi David Cohen is this outlandish character.
Right.
They keep saying he's the Tod Goldberg, and his great writing holds it all together. But Rabbi David Cohen is this outlandish, unbelievable character. And I'm sitting there going, actually reappearing after being a hitman as a rabbi. I mean, America is nothing if not being a place of reinvention. Right. So to me, it doesn't seem that outlandish. It seems not normal, but certainly not any weirder than the nonfiction we see every day. Right. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, the conceit itself sounds improbable, right? A Chicago hitman hides out in Las Vegas as a rabbi, though he's not Jewish nor a rabbi. Like, that's funny. And I've sold television shows and books based on that sentence, because it's an improbable, sort of outlandish conceit until you start writing these books and people start emailing you and saying, "Did you read this article? Did you read this article?
Right.
Did you read this article?" And it keeps being about like hitmen that are rabbis in Jerusalem out ex-husbands for women, like ex-Mossad agents that become
Absolutely
rabbis in New York. All this stuff. The fact of the matter is that bad people end up getting good jobs later in life on a fairly regular basis. Like George Bush is a painter now.
Yes, he is.
So
not a good one, but he is.
Not a good one. But so I think it's a black comic conceit that ends up being more true than a lot of things. And
Sure.
A lot of things that happen in the book seem like highly improbable things. Oh, the mob is laundering bodies through a cemetery. Well, that, like, I read a story about that. Like
Right,
people are like nonfiction about this very thing.
Yeah.
Everything that a criminal can do in my mind, someone else has figured out to try to make money on in the real world itself. But I think also what it is, frankly, is that people are afraid to talk about the Judaism part of it. They're afraid to talk about the rabbi part of it, in a way that doesn't sort of make it as part of an outlandish thing, because it becomes touchy territory. Like, oh, what are we supposed to say about someone pretending to be a Jew? Like, that's a really difficult sort of road to hoe.
Who ends up being somebody that his flock feels can actually rely on him.
Right. Exactly. Like, that's dicey stuff. I mean, here's the funny thing is, since these books have come out, I've spoken in a lot of synagogues.
Okay.
And oftentimes book clubs in synagogues across the country will pick Gangsterland or one of the other books as like their book club pick of the month. And whenever they contact me for an interview or to talk to me, I always say the same thing, which is, would we be having this conversation if my last name were O'Neill? And they always say the same thing. Oh, no, absolutely not. So I get a lot of latitude because I am Jewish to write about this stuff. But it's still dicey territory for someone else to talk about.
Yeah, no, I get it. Well, one thing you mentioned in an interview that I thought was really spot on, and I thought was interesting. And it's always weird in an interview when you get yourself read back to yourself, but I'm going to do it. And so, we talked, or you talked about, there was a question. Unfortunately, I don't know where it's from. Apologies. But it said, the question was, your books are good at conveying how deeply ingrained criminality is in our daily lives. And you responded with, and that's part of the joy of writing about organized crime. It's fun to write about guys trying to get away with it. It used to be the American dream was about possibility. Go west, find your fortune. Now the dream is getting away with it. And that's a little bit what we've got going on here, right? In these books is you've got a guy who is on the run and is very much, to some degree at least, maybe not from the law enforcement that's following, but certainly the people in front of him in his daily life, he's getting away with it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so much about our culture today is this notion of like fake it till you make it,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Or also the imposter syndrome that I think we all have as well, where even if we are qualified for the thing that we're doing, we all feel like, oh, someone's going to reveal the truth about me, and I'll be revealed to be a fraud. But I really think that as it relates to sort of organized crime and criminality in general and American culture, this notion of just like of getting away with it now is it. Like,
yeah,
I don't want to compare everything that we have in our lives to our, the current political status that we have, but there's a man running for president that has 91 criminal indictments against him. He's getting away with it.
And CEO pay at this point is 350% higher than it was a few decades ago, and we just accept that as normal. It's like if somebody gives us a loan, if somebody loans us $50 and says, well, there's going to be a 30 percentile added onto that, we're like, oh, he's a shyster, he's trying to. But if the corporation does it, we go, oh, that's just normal.
Yeah. I mean, I paid $6 a gallon for gas just 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And I assure you that is not the cost. I mean, it's the cost of capitalism, but it's not the cost of the company. And I'm not saying that that we have to be a socialist society or something like that, but there is ingrained in us the notion of pushing things as far as we possibly can to see what we can get away with.
Absolutely.
And the sort of lack of shared altruism that I see in the world really depresses me, and like sometimes it's just as simple as, like, yesterday I was at the grocery store and I put my cart away when I was done, and then the guy in the car next to me just sort of shoved his behind another car. And I'm not a violent man, Brian, but I'm just like, there's a part of me that's like, hey, motherfucker, why don't you grab that fucking cart and put that fucking cart away, or that fucking cart is going to be part of you. And like, it's like, I'm just going to get away with it. I'm just going to shove this cart over here. And
okay, so I just have to interject here for a sec, Todd, because this is really funny, because it reminds me of something. Andrew Miller is a writer right now in LA, Pasadena area. Very, very good writer. He's won a bunch of awards recently. He's got a book coming out next year. He was in our first review as well, but and I believe he's going to be at the 29 Palms Book Fest with us. But he, I believe, works or worked at one point at Trader Joe's, and he and he had a post one time, that a social media post that said, what you do with your shopping cart tells me all I need to know about you as a person.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I believe society will break down when the last person just leaves his cart next to the car. Like, that's the day. It's like, I'm not gonna.
Yeah, I'm done.
That's the end of Western Civ.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is Aldi, the market, they cornered the market on it, because you have to pay a quarter to get your cart, and then you don't get your quarter back unless you return it. So you have to return your cart.
They've incentivized being a good person. See, this is the grift. That's a total grift. They're making money off of your insensitivity.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean,
what religion
the
does?
Entire city of Vegas is based on that. But
it incentivizes good behavior, right? I mean,
yeah.
But yeah, that's anyway. Go ahead. You were with the shopping cart. I apologize for.
Oh no, I'm just saying that, like, everyone is doing the least they possibly can for the good of the world, and they're all trying to get theirs. Yeah. And you see it in people, you see it in business, you see it in churches, you see it in government. It has changed the notion of what the American dream was. And the American dream has also been priced out for most people. And the American dream is really the American dream of white people.
Yeah.
So all these things that I see, there's an element to it of organized crime that is built into it. That you want the American dream, it's going to cost you a little bit something extra. It's going to be $50 to that guy, $50 to that guy.
Yeah.
I mean, and that to me is is why we also like to read books about people in organized crime or people getting away with it. That's why Breaking Bad was so popular, because here's a person who's got a teaching job and is a great drug dealer, and we think, yeah, that underpaid teacher should get his. He's underpaid, undervalued. You know what? Go sell meth. Go get paid. Go get your cancer treatments, because your school isn't going to pay for it.
Right.
It's like this is where we have come as a society. Right. But it's also something I love to explore because I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, of course. No, I get that. It's a terrifying and crappy concept that we have in our culture now, but it is very real. And you're right. We do like to see that. I mean, it's something that is all around us, as you mentioned with one of the political candidates right now, which is, very much, very, very much, and right out there in the open. I mean,
well, that's the thing. I mean,
right out there in the open. Just
this is
you get what you can get. If you paid your taxes, you're a dumbass, not me.
Right. I mean, and this is something I wrote about throughout all three books, that like there are these gangsters, both in the books but also in real life, that are such profound gangsters that you don't believe they're gangsters, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And so, like, I made this character Ronnie Coopertine in Gangsterland and all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
He owns car dealerships where he dresses up as a gangster and shoots bullet holes in your credit report, but
Sure.
he's an actual like gangster, but he makes fun of himself and therefore he can live in society.
Right.
You know, and there's a rich history of this, you know, from John Gotti to Sammy the Bull and all those guys.
You know, and I think you mentioned in something I read that there's a you lived in Vegas or
Right.
Vegas adjacent. I haven't, but I have spent, actually, funny enough, went to the Mob Museum just like, I'm going to say 5-6 months ago, and it was fun. It was a good experience. But we have this nostalgia almost for, you know, the whole concept of, you know, women in beautiful black dresses and men in suits and tuxedos, and there's this violence underlying it all, and Vegas very much, for a long time anyway, not necessarily now, but for a long time, kind of embraced that.
Yeah, well, they still embrace it. I mean, the slogan for Las Vegas is "What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas."
Right.
Like it's a license to be an asshole. The funny thing is that the slogan for Vegas before that was Vegas is for families. That didn't work. Like people didn't come and spend money at strip clubs with their wife.
Right.
Kids,
they did make that push there for a while. Yeah.
So like their whole advertising campaign for the last 20 years has been, hey, come here, act like an asshole, and we'll keep your secrets. And that's some mob shit right there. I mean, I mean, the Mob Museum is a great place, and it's run by a very good friend of mine, Jeff Schumacher, who was my editor for many years in Vegas.
Very cool.
And I'm going to do an event there sometime soon, and cool. I like going there. I always do signings there when I have a new book out. But here's the thing: there's not a museum for the Mexican mafia or the Crips and the Bloods in downtown Los Angeles.
No.
You know, so there is a even in crime, a ghettoization based on race. And, you know, we view the Italian crime families in an entirely different way than we view the Russian crime families or the Black crime families or the Mexican crime families or the cartels. You know, all these things, none of them have the romance that the Italian crime families have, because no one made The Godfather in 1972 about the Crips and the Bloods and put every good-looking American actor in it.
Right. It's true. It's totally true. And I think I think that's a really good point. But the one thing I would add to that, I think anyway, is it's also, to me, because the romance of the Italian mafia that we think of is more the 50s, 60s, and 70s,
right.
and 40s.
Really,
so
yeah.
You do have the fedoras, you have the hats, which is in my mind at least, what makes for example, somebody like Easy Rawlins, right, the Walter Mosley character, much more kind of romantic, in the sense of he's the same era, and it's, you know, he's still in the A shirts and the fedora, and it's even though he's African American, it's still very, there's that romance to it, whereas somebody in the 80s, that's not romantic. You were, you know.
Right. I mean, it's romantic unless you owed one of those guys money.
Yeah.
It's romantic unless they stomped the shit out of your dad and left you without a family. You know, I mean, people are nostalgic for things that they were not part of.
Oh, totally.
I mean, and you see it all the time in like the American nostalgia, just in general. Oh gosh, wouldn't it be great to be back in the 1950s? Oh yeah, when Black people couldn't go to school with you. Yeah, it's a wonderful time that was.
Yeah, what a great time. Yeah.
Or we all smoked filterless cigarettes, and in 17 years, everyone started to die of pancreatic cancer. Wasn't that a lovely time?
Yeah, exactly. Or, you know, or even when we're talking about the getting away with the concept, right? Because I throughout my life, I played football for quite a while, and I coached football after that. And it's so funny to me when I see people who go, I learned such great life lessons. And sure, there's there's teamwork and there's picking each other up and all that stuff is great. Don't get me wrong. That's fantastic. But I can't tell you how many coaches I've had who have said, if you don't get called, it's not a penalty. You
Right.
did something wrong. That's the worst life lesson in the
Right.
world. Like,
Yeah.
that's
It is terrible. I mean, similarly, I played soccer for like 14 years.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you wouldn't imagine this looking at me now or talking to me now, but I liked to hurt people.
Uh-huh.
And they would just be like, "Hey, Todd, someone comes through the center of that pitch, put them on their fucking ass."
Yeah.
I'd be like, "All right." Like, that's not how you coach soccer, by the way. I mean, I played sweeper, but it wasn't like, that's not the job.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But like, you can see it, but your listeners can't. I have a scar right here,
Uh-huh.
and it's from a tooth that
Oh,
got
nice.
embedded
Yeah.
in my forehead from a guy that I hit face to face playing soccer, and we both woke up, and I had his tooth stuck in my forehead.
Nice. All right, so let's change gears here for a sec. So you wrote something at one point, or you said something at one point that was the person said, talk about the divide between genre and literary fiction. And you wrote, when I was younger, I was scared of being called a crime novelist because I was a pretentious young person. But now I'm like, fuck it, I'm just going to do everything I want to do. And there is this kind of stigma, has been for a long time. And that's part of the reason, by the way, why we called Starlite Pulp. We could have done but we wanted to embrace that and be like, you know what? Genre is cool as far as I'm concerned. Like, I like horror, I like Westerns, I like crime, I like, I'm not interested in a Carver short story, about some East Coast professor that's screwing 3 students and
three. I would be interested in 3.
And so,
that's a story I'd like to read.
And so talk to me a little bit about that, because I do feel in a funny way, like, I'm not saying the tide has shifted. I don't think that's the case at all. But there is, I think it's a little bit more accepted now, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think the tide actually has shifted in a tangible sense, because the young people coming up today that are writing books, the 23-year-olds or whatever, they grew up not reading, like, we all had to read Ivanhoe and The Great Gatsby and stuff.
Yes.
They grew up reading Hunger Games and The Maze Runner and Harry Potter. And so they grew up in their free time reading genre fiction that we did not have access to. And I think I'm probably maybe a little older than you, but when I grew up, if I wanted to read genre fiction, of course I was doing it on my own. But my YA fiction, and probably the reason that I grew up like I did, was I was reading crime fiction and Stephen King novels because my brother was giving them to me. And my brother is 9 years older than me and handing them down. But really what I'm seeing, particularly in the MFA students that apply to my program, so I run the MFA program, the low residency MFA at UC Riverside.
Love that.
And what I'm seeing in the applications is a lot of mixed genre writing.
Yeah.
Stuff not necessarily like sword and sorcery stuff, but magical realism, stuff that takes place in space, stuff that takes place on the head of a pin, whatever it might be. And you're seeing more and more of it. And the challenge is not whether or not these people are good writers of it. It's whether or not there's any teachers in these sort of old school programs that are qualified to read it.
Sure.
Because in the academy itself,
I get that. Yeah.
In the academy, not in the real world, but in the academy, it's filled with people who don't read genre fiction. It's filled with people who still disparage genre fiction.
I know.
And, when I started this MFA program, which we are celebrating our 15-year anniversary, in fact, awesome. I said, we are going to be a program that embraces genre fiction, teaches genre fiction. If you've got a story about a goat on planet Mars who's in an erotic romance, I want to read it. Whatever it is you're writing, I want to read it. But that's not true throughout other places. But here's the broader thing that I see, is that crime fiction has always been American fiction. It's always been the canon of American fiction. I mean, let me explain to you a great book that I read when I was a young person. It's about this grifter who works for a gangster, and he moves into a mansion in New York, basically so he can peep on this woman that he was in love with, who lives across the water from him. In order to get close to this woman, who's sort of a femme fatale, I got to tell you, he gets a dupe who moves into his property, and he has this dupe do the job for him and then everyone ends up dying. It's called The Great Gatsby.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, like The Great Gatsby is noir as fuck. It's a
absolutely
180-page noir novel.
And Todd, I mean, Poe is crime fiction. I mean,
of course. I mean, they named the crime award for him. Or I mean, think about like To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Without To Kill a Mockingbird, John Grisham is just a lawyer, and the cruise industry ceases to exist. To Kill a Mockingbird is a legal thriller. So there's all these books that in the history and the canon of American literature that we consider the great works that at some core level have crime fiction or genre fiction inside of them. I mean, even something like Handmaid's Tale, but I think Handmaid's Tale is the perfect example of she's Canadian, so we'll say North American fiction, but here's a book that, has now superseded Ray Bradbury essentially as the North American dystopian fiction.
Sure.
And she did it better than anyone. She did it in 1985,
Sure. And so a classic example for me personally is Cormac McCarthy, because it's so funny to me. Like classic example also is Gatsby that you just brought up, right? Which is it's a crime novel, it's a noir novel, but you know what? Because it's regarded as literature, it's not allowed to be genre.
Right.
It's like when McCarthy. To me, McCarthy's a Western writer. Don't get me wrong, Suttrie's not, and some of his other stuff is not. But if you go through the Border trilogy, you go to Blood Meridian,
all that shit,
it's dystopian, it's Western. That's what it is. He's a Western writer, but because he's a prose stylist, all of a sudden, it's literary.
Yeah,
fuck off. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, come on. We do this thing where it's like because some critic out there says it's good writing, well, then it can't be genre,
right?
And that drives me bananas. It
drives me bananas too. I mean, and I've been a book critic for the last 23 years, and often they'll have me only, like, people often just ask me to only read crime fiction. And I'm like, no, I'm capable of reading anything.
I'm capable of reading other things.
And providing my opinion for money. Right. But I think the thing about crime fiction is that it's viewed in some eyes as a lesser art because it's more entertaining than someone writing about the sadness of their mother or whatever. I mean, I've always thought of crime fiction as more socially relevant than literary fiction because it forces you to look at some really bad aspect of our world and figure out the reasons why that thing happened. I've said it before in interviews and stuff that, great crime fiction holds a mirror up to society and forces the reader to stare at the things they don't want to see. Literary fiction, it holds a mirror up to a house, and you just have to wonder what's going on inside of it.
Right, pretty much, yeah. Well, though, it's funny because it does go both ways, weirdly, because I do want to point that out. It does get flipped sometimes because I published a bunch of crime stories over the years, but I have had feedback sometimes where it said, well, this wasn't hard-boiled enough. We felt this was the language was too flowery or whatever. Right. And it's like, really? Like, there's still a bunch of shootings. There's still that, but it's a little too poetic, so that can't be crime. And it's like,
yeah, and I think about some of the practitioners of crime fiction that I think are doing the best work right now, and someone like my friend Ivy Pakoda, for instance, her book These Women, she really wrote the first book that was victim facing about a serial killer, essentially.
Okay.
And it's just beautifully written and extraordinarily well rendered, and she got all the praise in the world for it, but it's not going to sell as well as a James Patterson novel because it's a more intellectual pursuit than Alex Cross finds a dead girl and solves the crime, whatever it might be.
Right.
But a writer like Ivy or a writer like Dennis Lehane, I think is the progenitor of the most popular sort of literary crime fiction,
probably,
that's a term. But he gets that because he's also writing sort of propulsive plots. But his language is beautiful as well, and he's
Sure.
putting a lot of thought into things. But it's a strange thing that I think in a lot of ways the sort of quasi demise of the brick and mortar bookstore is changing. Most of us, for better or worse, end up buying our books online.
Yeah.
And there's not that labyrinth of shelves you have to walk through to get to the book that you want. You're just clicking around and looking at things, or, oh, whoever liked this book, like that book, I'm gonna go look at that. And I think that's changed the way people shop. Certainly if you look at the bestseller list, it's almost 100% genre fiction. Crime, horror, romance. Colleen Hoover. It is very rarely, like right now, Ann Patchett has a #1 book. But Ann Patchett, is sort of, has always been sort of a domestic literary superstar. But in general, genre fiction is what people read. It's what people actually want to read.
It's also what people watch. I mean, you look at you go to Netflix or Hulu right now, and I guarantee you, out of the top 10 watch shows, 7 of them are going to be.
I watched a terrible crime movie last night. In fact, terrible, and I watched it with utter joy. And then I've spent all day thinking about why was that movie not very good. So, listeners, go watch Reptile. Also, try to figure out why it's called Reptile, starring Benicio del Toro. You might be surprised to learn, Brian, he's a tortured cop.
It's a
with some problems. He's got some problems. They're coming to roost.
Yeah.
There's a lot of scenes where he stands out looking over a body of water. And sort of stares.
Yeah.
I've known a lot of cops. They haven't always been very thoughtful people.
No, generally not. No.
Very rarely do they just say, hey, you know what I gotta do? I gotta find a body of water.
I have to ruminate a bit.
Well, wearing a leather duster.
I need some alone time.
Yeah, just to think, stare at the body of water. Actually, there's a line in this movie, Brian. His wife is Alicia Silverstone, and he turns to her at one point and he says, "The only thing I love more than you is being a cop." Okay. Okay.
I actually saw a really bad Alicia Silverstone movie. You'll be shocked. That's recent. So not like Clueless Age or anything, like just in the last couple
this
years.
one.
And it was and it was a shark movie where there were almost no sharks. Like it was set up as a bad B movie shark, and there were no sharks, and it was the whole thing. It was but like you, I sat there, watched the whole damn thing.
Yeah. It's amazing what with legalization of gummies does for my Netflix watching. One gummy will get me through an entire Benicio del Toro cop movie. You know what I love more than gummies? Being a cop.
All right, man. So I got to change gears here because I have to understand. I read and had to double check it. You were the mayor of Indio.
No, God, no. No, okay. I outed the mayor of Indio for being an anti-Semite.
Okay, so talk to me about that. What happened there?
Oh gosh, so this was like 8 years ago. So Indio, so I live in the city of Indio, which is a suburb of Palm Springs. And the mayor of Indio at the time was this guy named Mike Wilson, who was just as Trumpy as Trump can be. And he would tweet crazy conspiracy theories and stuff constantly. And he had like 250 followers or something. And he was just saying crazy, awful stuff, and no one was really paying any attention to it.
Right.
And after Charlottesville happened, he tweeted a bunch of crazy anti-Semitic stuff, like fake flyers about like the Jews were behind things and stuff like that.
Right.
And so I thought, well, here's a man who clearly wants a bigger audience for his work. So I'm going to give it to him.
I'm going to expose him. Okay.
Yeah. So I just began talking back to him and retweeting all of his stuff.
Right.
And putting it up on Facebook and across all social media. And now he's not the mayor of Indio anymore.
I mean, but the fact that he even felt comfortable enough
Oh,
to tweet that stuff and that there would be no ramifications or no anything, that's crazy.
well, I mean, this goes back to the getting away with it, right? So what Trump emboldened in 2016 and beyond, of course, what we're experiencing right now is that everyone feels like they have the same platform that he had and that they can get away with it too. But the fact of the matter is that the consequences are more profound on a local level than they are on a national level. You're not the president of the United States. You're someone who lives in this town. Right. And when people find out what you're really about, there's a consequence to that action. Right. That means you're going to lose the next election.
Right.
But, you know, it's so weird. At that same time, like, you know, people that I didn't know were crazy racists and stuff were coming out of the woodwork on the internet, people that I'd gone to school with and things like that. And they were just beginning to say crazy lunatic shit.
Sure.
And, you know, I decided in many cases, well, it seems like you'd like a bigger audience for this.
Right.
Let me give it to you.
Yeah.
Let me help you out with your opinions.
Right.
And I lost a lot of friends, but they weren't really people I cared about anyway.
Right.
I mean, I'm not like, it's not like I'm a superhero. I just retweeted assholes.
Right. Well, you know, and it's insane because, you know, I mean, and this has nothing to do with Democrat, Republican, blue, red, any of that. A guy like George Santos, he still has his job. I mean, if he applied to Starbucks, he'd have been fired 8 months ago.
Yeah.
What?
I wouldn't trust that guy to make me a beef and cheddar.
Seriously, like,
I would murder a beef and cheddar.
I just it's you know, it's.
But see, like, this is the thing that we're talking about. Like, this is I feel like this is why people actually enjoy my books, is that this is what we're talking about. It's like the injustice of people acting a fool with no consequences.
No consequences, right?
And so in the character of Sal Cupertine and the Rabbi David Cohen, like, you act a fool around this guy, you say some shit he doesn't like, you're dead.
Nah.
He kills you.
Yeah.
And that's not a great response.
No.
But I think part of
there's a part of our lizard brain that gets that.
Yeah. Part of the appeal of writing a character like this during this time is, I mean, in the history of antiheroes, through the history of sort of pulp fiction from the beginning of the 20th century till now, has often been tied to social tumult, right? Like, during the Depression, that's the rise of the gold medal pulps, because people were fighting against oppression. They were fighting against the government, the haves versus the have-nots. And here you have an anti-hero who brings order to chaos.
Sure.
We love that in a period of social tumult.
Plus, they need escapism.
Right.
At the same time. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I feel like my books came around, I mean, these books, out of the books I've written in my career, came around at the right time because people were feeling that it was bubbling up already, but the haves versus the have-nots, the inequities of the life that we're living, the prevalence of organized crime, and I don't mean organized crime just like the mob, but I mean organized crime like countrywide. You know, when I wrote Gangsterland, I said it before. The first book takes place in 1998. The last book ends in 2002.
Right.
I'm talking about the beginnings of what was going to be like the biggest heist of our lives, which was the mortgage crisis of 2008. You know, we were robbed by Countrywide. Countrywide robbed the country, and we were just like, oh yeah, it's fine. We'll let him get away with that.
But again, that's what I was talking about earlier. When we have a person or people to blame, that's one thing. But as soon as it gets to a corporation, we're like, well,
I mean, it's like that old bit that that Eddie Izzard used to do, where he'd say, you know, we're horrified by a serial killer, like, oh, they killed 6 people, oh my god, what a monster. But you look at Pol Pot and you're like, oh, well done, he killed 16 million people. That must have taken you must have gotten him very early to do that. It's like, we can't function against the scale of the inequity. One person, you can feel it, and that's what I write about, really, is, you know, the one-to-one, but that one stands for something bigger, and I think that's why the stories have resonated. But it's not so different than me taking on the mayor of Indio and saying, you know what, fuck this guy. You know what, I'm going to write an op-ed about anti-Semitism in the Coachella Valley, which is something I did. And I'm going to point my finger at him because I'm not scared. I don't give a shit. I'm going to say, hey, this dude is an anti-Semite. Boom, right there. And for whatever reasons people had before that they were scared to do it, I'm not. I don't care.
Right.
But that also comes from a larger belief that I have about the role of the writer in society, which is I feel like if you are articulate and care about things and you have an ability to speak for people that share your values, you should do it. You should get out there and you should write those things, because art is always political. It doesn't matter if it's a drawing, a song, or a book. There's some aspect of it that is political. And I feel like that's part of our duty as writers is to speak for those people that can't speak.
Sure, absolutely. So transitioning here, because that's an excellent thought to do it on. You're the first person we've had 22 now of these podcasts. You're the first person I've run into who is a creative writing teacher besides myself, who's done it. And so I want to get some thoughts on that, because there's you get writers who come from, you get writers who did it in high school and then they get away from it and then they get back into it. You have people who come into it later in life, like Frank Bill. You've got people who knew at 15 they wanted to be a writer and hell bent on it and they were going to do their thing. And one of the fascinating parts about any kind of art, whether it's painting or writing or sculpting or whatever else, is that everybody has their own unique journey to get there. There's no right or wrong way to do it. That's the thing. And so as a creative writing instructor and somebody who runs the program, by the way, just to reiterate here, Tod is program director, correct?
Yes, I am a professor and program director and founder. I built this shit of the low residency MFA at UC Riverside.
Right. So you have students that come through all the time, obviously not market amounts of students. That's not how creative writing works, but you've got your student base and your student population. And what are your thoughts on teaching writing when it comes to the concept of some people come in with their own skills, right? You're always going to have that. Everybody starts at a baseline, wherever that is.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they come to a program like this. And how do you feel about how you can develop that as they go forward?
Well, I sort of work from an advantage because I'm selecting all the students. So in the MFA at UCR, there's about 100 students across 4 genres: fiction, nonfiction, screenwriting, and playwriting.
Perfect.
And there's a committee that makes the recommendations, but ultimately I select the students. And there's some that are slam dunks, some that are writing stuff right now, and it's so amazing. You just know they're going to be great. But every new class, and I typically take 30 new students per year, 15 in fall, 15 in spring. There's always a student that their work is not as good as or as polished as the other people.
Sure.
But there's a sentence. There's a thought. There's a plot line. There's something that tells me, okay, this is a person that probably is not all that well read. And typically that's the case. Who's not had a ton of instruction, and that's always the case. Who does not know what they don't know. Right. And I can give that person, in the course of 2 months, I can say, read this book, this book, this book, this book. Tell me what you're interested in. Oh, you like this? Okay, read that. And in 2 months' time, the next thing that they write, it will be like Dodger Stadium Klieg lights turned on inside their head. Right. And you will see what inspiration and knowledge does to talent. And so, I mean, I don't believe you can teach writing to someone who doesn't have any talent. You have to have talent. Oh, without question. Yeah. But if you have talent, I personally, and the teachers that I employ, because I employ people that share a philosophy with me, we can get you where you want to go. We can get you to be a writer who is of publishable quality. Whether or not someone buys your book, your movie, your play, or whatever.
Yeah.
That's the market.
That's a different animal. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's often just about that level of inspiration and teaching them sort of like to trust their own instincts, to believe in themselves. I mean, these all sound like sort of, like ethereal things, but sometimes it's just like sitting down with a writer and saying, all right, we're going to look at this sentence. I'm going to tell you why this sentence works and this sentence doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And explaining to them the nuances of language that makes the sentence work, or why they've repeated themselves, or what I'm seeing in a particular place.
Sure.
So all of those things I can do. But you have to have a writer who's willing and able to take criticism and take the micro rejection of being told, hey, this thing that you spent a month on doesn't work.
Right.
But it can work. If you rewrite, if you do this, if you do that. Mm-hmm. There are very few writers that come through the program that I direct who don't graduate, because we take really good writers. But the very small percentage that, sort of never get to where they want to be, it's because they don't actually want to be told anything other than you're great.
Yeah. And
they just want affirmation.
Right. And that's part of the thing, just briefly, that's part of the thing about an artist just in general. You're going to get rejected.
Yeah.
Period. End of story. You're going to get rejected. Right. And if you can't deal with that, that's a problem, because
you're fucked. And I mean, like here, and it's not even just about rejection on the larger level. And this is something I try to impart to my students every day, is like any night that I want at 3:00 in the morning, I can get on Amazon or Goodreads and find someone telling me all the stuff I believe to be true about myself, positive or negative.
Right.
And these are strangers to me. Right. But if I want that, if I want someone to tell me I suck and here's the reasons why, hey, it's one click and there it is. And I look at those bad reviews sometimes just to like see like, okay, where did I fail for that person?
Sure.
But you gotta have a strong will for that sort of thing.
Oh, you do.
Here's the thing, in my teaching and in my program, I have a very simple philosophy, which is nothing punitive. I run a creative writing program that, is about the person first and the work that they're doing and achieving their goal. Like, what is it you want? Mm-hmm. We don't take a lot of hobbyists. Most people are there because they want a career in it. But I say, like, what is it you want? And they just say, hey, I just want to write one great book. All right, let's work on that one great book.
Okay.
But like nothing punitive ever for the creative process. No one's ever going to tell you can't write that. Mm-hmm. I might tell you shouldn't write it, but if you want to write that story about the goat on Mars, mm-hmm. Who sings in the Rolling Stones cover band, hey, you know what? Like Jumpin' Jack, Mars Flash, let's do it.
It better be great.
It better be great. Like let's make it as great as possible.
Yeah.
And there's this other notion, and it creeps up always around application time on social media about, well, why do you need an MFA? Or why do you need to go get taught creative writing at all?
Sure.
Now, here's the truth. I published 6 books before I got a graduate degree in creative writing. And I got the graduate degree in creative writing because I'd been hired to start an MFA program. And didn't have the degree yet. And what I found when I went to get my MFA is that in some places, the teaching of the MFA, the teaching of creative writing is archaic. They're teaching it like it's 1975.
Yeah, true.
And when I went through that, like that was the best experience that I had in becoming a director of an MFA program, was seeing how someone else does it, seeing how like one of the top programs at the time in the country was teaching creative writing and realizing, oh, they're 5 years away from being completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
And understanding that the teaching of creative writing is not a fixed art. It's not math.
Yeah.
It is something that has to continually change with the student, with the teacher, with the marketplace, and with the reality of the world that we're living in. The things that you can say and do in workshop. I remember Daniel Woodrell in an interview that I read, and I love Woodrell. He's one of my favorite writers and one of my favorite people. He's a great dude. He said, when I went to University of Iowa, someone said something to me in workshop that if they'd said it to me in a bar, they'd leave without their teeth. And I've always thought about that. Like, yeah, man, like workshop's a different place.
It's true. It is. No, it's totally true. Because in a workshop, everything's fair game.
Yeah.
Everything's fair game. Yeah. And no, I 100% get that. Because I've sometimes in workshop, I've sat there just seething, after over this thing you slaved over, and you didn't think so and so at the corner of the table is going to take it well anyway, because generally they don't like your stuff, but all of a sudden they're ready to just burn it in front of you, and you just have to sit there and wear it.
Can I tell you a funny story? So when I went to grad school, my wife went to grad school too. She decided to get her degree in creative writing as well. She was a writer for many years. She doesn't write anymore, but she was working on short stories then, and she was very good. She published everything she wrote in grad school. She published.
Excellent.
But we told the program directors, hey, don't put us in class together. Like Wendy has to have her own identity. Number one, it's already weird that we're here together as husband and wife. Weirder still that she's here with her husband, the novelist who runs it.
Right. Yeah.
They of course didn't listen, and they put us in a workshop together. And I did not like hearing people critique my wife's work. And there was this one workshop where this dude just had it for her. Like, and the story that she'd written was brilliant. It ended up getting nominated for a Pushcart Prize, all kinds of stuff.
Nice.
And he just like was nitpicking and saying shit. And finally, I just looked at him and I said, "You say one more fucking word, I'm gonna shove that pencil in your fucking eye." And Wendy was like, Todd? I was like, metaphorically. I'm not insulting your wife, dude. I was like, oh no? You're not? Because it sure feels like it.
I'm gonna kill you off in my next book, bro.
Yeah. Oh God. I was like, well, that was not a good experience.
Yeah. I can see that. Yeah.
Never ever be in a workshop with your wife.
Yeah. I get that.
Oh God. But I mean, so I think the industry of creative writing, here's my last big point, is that when you go back to that argument that you see half the time on the internet whenever applications are around, these sort of programs that seem esoteric are esoteric. And the way that I have treated creative writing in my own program, and at this level, it's different than if you're just teaching creative writing to undergrads. These are all
totally.
Is we prepare you for publication. So every single person that comes through my program gets their book or their movie or whatever read by agents and editors and producers and things like that. That doesn't happen in MFA programs. You are just being judged by your peers, and then that's it. And I just think that's so silly. And so, don't go get an MFA and then not end up closer to publication at the end of it.
Sure.
Don't go there to become the most well-read barista in all of Pleasant Hill. Go there for a really good reason. And my focus on the professional side, the publication side, and the production side for the screenwriters, for a lot of times, like, these other program directors will be like, "Oh, you're not teaching craft. You don't know what you're talking about." Right. Oh no, I'm teaching craft too, and my students are getting published. That's the difference. I'm not turning out professors. I'm turning out writers.
Yeah, and I was actually going to say that. I was going to interject when you were saying that, because there are some people, funny enough, and I know this might sound weird to writers out there who are listening, but there are some people that go to MFA programs who are thinking more about becoming a professor of writing than they are about being a professional writer.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
And that's fine. Like, if you want to go be a professor, don't go to a low residency, number one. But number two, like, go and do that student teaching thing and devote your life to being on a leafy campus somewhere in the Midwest and, wearing patches on your elbows and shit. I ain't about that. Like, I'm about black t-shirts and jeans. So I gotcha. Come to me, like, to be a professional. And we've been successful because of that focus. The students that I end up picking are the students that want to be a professional writer and are coming to me to get that leg up. Because also no one that works for me isn't still a professional writer. No one who teaches for me, last thing they did was, Escape from Witch Mountain in 1974 or something.
Right, right.
But who were all the people that taught me in undergrad? Oh, I loved Escape from Witch Mountain 2. That was your best work.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. And it struck me, you're right in the sense that a lot of writing programs out there will bring out these venerable, ancient, talented, distinguished people who were really good in the 50s,
right,
60s, and possibly right. 70s, and then they'll show their work, and it's like, it's wonderful, but it's not relevant at all for now. You know what I mean? Like that's a really great screenplay you wrote in 1963. It's a funny movie. I didn't know about it. That's awesome. But in 2023,
but there's also a bad flip side to this, which is that when Jane Smiley was teaching at the main campus of UC Riverside, so not the same program, but like the undergrads didn't know who they were dealing with.
Right, sure, of course, yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, I don't want to take Jane Smiley's class; it's hard. Hey, Jane Smiley is one of the greatest writers in American history.
Well, sure, yeah, and but Todd, I think that's more undergrad, just in general.
Yeah, in general, right?
Yeah, if you're 18 to 20, you don't know,
right? You don't know.
Yeah,
that's a good point. When I was 18, I was majoring in Sigma Phi Epsilon, so I understand.
All right, man. We're going to finish up, hang out when we're done. But first off, this was Tod Goldberg. Good dude. This is Gangsters Don't Die. This is the third in the Gangsterland trilogy. So pick this up on your virtual bookshelves or wherever else you buy books these days, bookshop.org or any local bookstore, certainly. Go to that, pick that up. And Todd, it's been a pleasure having you here, man.
Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Appreciate you. All right.
In this top secret